Hello everyone, welcome to the course entitled Plant Anatomy and Names. This course has been given the course number of 2161 by the North Carolina Landscape Contractors Licensing Board. This course is good for one technical or one landscape credit for your continuing education for year 2022. Meaning that this course is good up until July 31st, 2022 for the current year. Now, this course has not been approved by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture for a pesticide credit, nor has it been approved for a irrigation credit with the North Carolina Irrigation Contractors Licensing Board. This course is specifically designed for North Carolina Landscape Contractors Licensing Board continuing education. So let's go ahead and jump into the lecture. Now, you've heard me say time and time again that we need to know our plant material. We not only need to know the identification and how to identify the plants, we need to know the anatomy and physiology of our plant material. Doctors every so often have to get, training in anatomy and physiology. They have to take it every so often. Their continuing education consists of a lot of anatomy and physiology. We need to study the plant's anatomy and physiology. How do these plants work? What makes them, take up food? What makes them take up water? This is the anatomy and physiology of our plant materials. And then last but not least, we need to know how to correctly identify these plants. And so we're not really learning how to identify a holly as we did in identifying the hollies in the landscape class. We're actually learning how to identify leaf margins, leaf shapes, and the anatomy part of that, and how it's taken to identify the structures of the plants. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, it's worth one landscape credit for NCLCLB. There will be a 10-question quiz at the end of the lecture. You'll have to pass the quiz before you can actually download your proof of attendance form for the course. There are also going to be check on learning questions that have nothing to do with the actual lecture material. A lot of you guys are already super smart. This is a refresher course. That way we throw these check on learning questions, periodically throughout the quiz, just so that the board knows that you guys are watching the lectures. So just something new that we're doing this year is the check on learning. With plant divisions, plants have divisions. They're either a gymnosperm or an angiosperm. Your angiosperms are seeds born with a mature ovary or fruit. Now look at the picture here. You have the style, you have the ovary there. So it's a lot different looking than the gymnosperm. Examples of angiosperms, sunflowers, pumpkins, marigolds, stuff that we see on an everyday basis. I mean, we're planting them in the landscape. They are further divided into monocots, which is a one-seed leaf, and a dicot, your two-seeded leaves. Monocots, your turf grasses, palm trees. Your dicots are going to be your azaleas, your hollies. So think of it on that classification. If you listen to my radio show on Turfs Up Radio, we used to do Monocot Monday, which we talked about, the monocots, particularly the turf grasses. With your gymnosperms, these are seeds that are not enclosed in an ovary or fruit. These would be your pines, your spruces, and your ginkgo. And the ginkgo tree is the last of its kind. It's one of my favorite trees just because of that color. The golden colors of a ginkgo tree. I love it. And it always reminds me of being on campus at Wake Forest University there at Renewal Gardens, because they have two ginkgos planted side by side, one male and one female. And as we all know, that the ginkgo female tree produces a fruit that is very nasty with the smell. I mean, it smells, horrible, especially when you run over them with a lawnmower or whatever, and you smush that fruit. It's just very, very nasty. But inside that fruit, is that seed. So my favorite tree, the ginkgo tree, because of the golden color of Wake Forest University. Your monocots and dicots, sample here. Look, you got the seed that's came up, the dicot. Remember, two cotyledons, which we have the turf grass on the right, which is a monocot or monocotyledon. But your monocots are grasses. They can be flowering bulbs, orchards, and palm trees. Palm trees are in the same division as turf grass. They have long and narrow leaves with parallel running veins, and they have the xylem and phloem bundles instead of the xylem and phloem rings. Now, your xylem and phloem, think of this as in a human, in your body, how do we get food? It's we digest it, and then the nutrients are running through through the bloodstream, and getting all the stuff that our cells need in the body through our capillaries, through our blood vessels and veins. Same thing happens with plants. Xylem and phloem is transporting water and nutrients to the plant cells. Xylem, think about it for water. Xylem being, every time I hear the word or see the letter X, I think of water. I think of irrigation. We have the xeriscape gardens, plants that take, very little water. So xylem, meaning to me, water is transporting the water. Phloem, the phloem, reminds me of the word food. So food, carrying pipes within the plant that gets the food out to the plant cells. Dicots, your woody plants, several herbaceous perennials as well. They're various shaped leaves with vein patterns. We're going to see some charts with the different vein patterns here in a second. And they actually have the xylem and phloem rings. So it's like when you dissect it, you're actually going to see those in rings instead of bundles. Parts of the leaf. Usually categorized as a broadleaf with a wide and flat surface, or as a softwood conifer with needle or scale-like shapes. And think about the conifers that, and I'll always revert or think back to a white pine, Pinus strobus, being some of the first needle or conifers that I planted in my career, just because the jobs that my parents had. I just remember planting a lot of white pines, and I remember how soft the wood was on the white pines compared to the Nellie Stevens that we started planting, and then big time planted a lot of red tip photinias. Those were being the angiosperms, more of a harder wood. But, your conifers have that needle or scale-like shape leaf. The petiole, it's the stem-like structure that attaches the leaf to the stem. Some plant types do not have a petiole. With your auxiliary bud, this is the bud formed at the base of the leaf petiole, between the petiole and the stem. And guys, we're going to have a picture here in the next slide that shows a lot of this. Then there's the blade, which is the leaf of the plant. The type and arrangement depends on the plant type. Now, a lot of people will think that a leaf is an individual needle or an individual leaf, but it depends on the plant itself. Your midrib is the main leaf vein that runs from the petiole through the center of the leaf. Here is the picture. Again, let's just take a look at this picture first and foremost. We have a lateral vein, that's running out right here. Here's your tip. This is your blade. Here's the base. Here we have a bud. Here's the midrib. The margin is what goes around, and there's multiple margins that can be on a plant. The petiole is this little stem or leaf stalk right here that, we would, a lot of us would call the stem of the leaf. And then you have your stipules here at the base of it. So a good diagram here of a leaf coming off of, a stem or branch here. But the epidermis, just like in humans, is a protective layer covering the top and bottom of the leaves, and this determines the leaf structure. Our skin, epidermis is part of our skin, which is a protective layer of our body. So plants and us animals, there's some similarities, guys. And unfortunately, I think, plant materials are going to be here long after humans are gone. They're just more adaptable to situations that may arise here on Earth than us humans. Plants will always be here. Cuticle is the thin, waxy substance covering the epidermis. This protects the leaf from dehydration and prevents disease-causing organisms from entering the leaf. The stomata, these are openings on the underside or bottom of the leaf that regulates gas exchange. The plants are breathing. They're allowing for gas exchange. But these stomata are made up of guard cells that determine when the stomata open and close. And these guard cells, very smart. They know when they can open and when they can't. But the opening and closing of the stomata depends on various environmental conditions. The plants are smart. They're knowing when they can do this and when they can't. Here's some leaf arrangements. A simple leaf, here on a cottonwood tree. So, a leaf by itself. Palmately compound leaf, such as white clover. Wonder why we don't have a 4-leaf clover here to show some good luck. But it is palmately compound. Here we have a pinnately compound leaf. And, these guys are opposite of each other here. Here we have a double compound leaf, such as the honey locust. So each one of these, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. These are all leaves. And like I said, a lot of us will think of a leaf as just being one of these. So, picking one of these off, here is a leaf. No, the entire pinnately compound structure here is a leaf of the black walnut. Same thing with the honey locust here. One of the double compound leaves, not one of these tiny little things is a leaf. It's the entire structure here that we are seeing. So these are our leaf structures. The bud structure, these are undeveloped shoots containing leaf and flower parts. And once developed, they can develop a protective layer of bud scales, which we see right here. The leaf buds are pointed and narrow, and then the flower buds are round and plump. With your terminal buds located up here at the very top, these are located at the end of the stem, and then your lateral buds are located along the side of the stem. So good picture here of the terminal and bud scales. The laterals, you have your rough outer skin. You have a leaf scar right here, and then you have a node pointed right at that little tip right there. And this is a woody stem. Now, we've talked about the xylem and phloem already. Here you can see the xylem right in here. And remember, we talked about the difference between the monocots and the dicots. We see the rings in the dicots. And so we see our xylem here, and then we see our phloem. Here we have our cortex. We have the outer skin. We have the pith in the center, the cambium, cell division and where, the plant is actually going to grow. But always think of that xylem and phloem as your pipes for, transporting water and food or nutrients to the plant. With your stem structure, the stems are going to transport the food, water, and nutrients within the plant. It also offers structural support to hold the plant upright. If it didn't have this structural support, it'd all be kind of flopped over to the ground. But your xylem tubes transport water and available nutrients, and then your phloem tubes transport food and hormones. And it's I don't know, I always think back to, hormones. We extract these hormones to actually, produce, some pesticides and some other products from the plants that can actually control it, control them. And it's real neat, and that is, a whole separate field, but, extracting these hormones from the plants and actually using them in controlling the plants. But the cell cambium is the site of the cell division and active growth. And we just saw that in that picture before of the cambium, and that's where, all of your cell division is going to happen, and the plant is actually growing in that part. You can see those rings grow. Node is the part of the stem where the leaves and the buds are attached, and then your internode is the space between the nodes on a stem. Length depends on fertility, light exposure, and the individual plant structure, as well as the growth during the time of the growing season, and if there's any competition that the plant may be having. Types of stems, we have a shoot. This is a young stem with leaves. A lot of people want to prune these out of the trees. You want to get rid of those shoots that are sticking out, especially at the bottom of some of the trees. A twig is a woody stem in its current or previous year's growth, so a fairly young piece of wood. A branch is a stem that is one or more years old and could have lateral stems. And then the trunk is the main stem of the woody plant. It is the central core of most trees and shrubs. So it is the center point of it. And then your branches are your next to oldest to the trunk coming off of the plant, then your twigs, and then your shoots. And a lot of people will go in and kind of prune out some of those shoots and twigs. I like doing that with our crepe myrtles versus crepe murder. And we've talked about that in the lecture here. Do you know how to prune? These are things that need to be practiced more so than actually topping back our trees. And then just going up and thinning a lot of the trees. We're cutting out those twigs and those shoots and removing any branches that might overlap and cause a place where disease and insects can harbor in the tree. Any rubbing of the trees or tree branches need to be taken out. Here are some modified stems. We have our above ground stems, which are your crowns, your stolons, your spurs. Your below ground stems are going to be your bulbs. It's going to be your corms, your rhizomes and tubers, ex-potato tubers, tulip bulbs, iris rhizomes, and crocus chromes or corms are examples of your below ground stems. So all of these are actually stems. It's just whether or not they're above ground or below ground. We have canes. These are shoots with a spongy tissue. And, on the outside, they may feel hard or brittle, but on the inside, they got that spongy tissue like a rose, grapes, blackberries, and even raspberries. And I'm looking forward to getting those fresh blackberries off the farm here. Nothing like going out into, the woods and in the hay fields and actually seeing the wild blackberries and being able to pick them off the pick them right off the briars that are out there. So all of these are your modified stems. Roots. The purpose of the roots to absorb nutrients and water. Below ground, they're pulling in all this food, the fertilizer that we're given, and they're absorbing the water. They do provide anchorage for plant, stem support, and food storage. Now, that stem support, that keeps, the plants anchored to the ground. And anytime we have these, horrible storms that come through, and we've had several days of rain and we've got high winds, that support may get a little weakened with the soil. As the soil gets weakened around it, these stems may fall over, and that's why we have trees fall. Tap roots. The primary root is the central root and the longest with the little to no branching. Your tap roots are often pruned in the nursery during plant production. With fibrous roots, they lack, this is the lack of a tap root with a large amount of branching lateral roots. Most of the food storage happens in fibrous lateral roots. And so a fibrous root system, some of your turf grasses, tap roots, some of your larger trees or whatever are going to have that tap root. With aerial roots, form freely on plants in moist areas. There are plants, in, tropical environments that are not in a soil medium. They are actually, out exposed, and they're absorbing their materials either from like the host plant or from the air itself. But they form freely on plants in moist areas. They enable climbing plants to attach to other trees or structures for anchorage and support. And they absorb water and nutrients from the air. And they do serve as water storage for the plants. And we're getting ready to see a taproot plant versus a fibrous root system here. And, most of your fibrous root systems, common to us is, like fescue. Here we have a taproot system of a dandelion. And think about it. When you go out and you try to dig up a dandelion, they always break off, right? Because that taproot is so anchored into the soil. It's hard to pull them out. You've actually got to get, a split fork or like a weeding fork and dig around it and loosen up that soil if you're wanting to get, this taproot pulled out. And I remember as a young man, we used to take care of an 88-acre site complex with all the mowing, fertilization, aeration, seeding. And one of the jobs that me and my brother had was to go around and hand weed some of the larger weeds that had come up in some of the shrub beds that we didn't necessarily maintain on a weekly basis. Of course, we had our guys go and spray around the residential homes, but there were areas that we only went, maybe once a month. But our job was to prune a lot, or not prune, but pull a lot of these weeds. And I remember one of the residents coming out and saying, "If you don't get it by the root, it ain't worth a hoot." And so, but what she was talking about was these tap roots on some of the larger weeds that had come up in the shrub beds that we were weeding. Oops, we didn't talk. But factors that influence the root growth, soil structure and texture, the water and oxygen availability, the soil temperature, and the nutrient storage and availability. Now, the one thing that I have noticed, some of these weeds, they're more adaptable than some of our, fescue grasses or whatever, or some of our ornamental shrub. Weeds are going to grow just about anywhere. We struggle sometimes to get plants growing and turf grass growing in areas that's, a little difficult based on soil conditions and water. But if we let it go, guess what's going to take over? The weeds. They're just more adaptable to these situations than some of our ornamentals. With reproductive growth, flowers, the only function is for reproductive growth of the flower. Yes, they attract the bees, but guess what they're doing? They're pollinating. Their main goal is to carry on life for the next generation. But flowers with stamens, pistils, and sepals are called complete flowers. And then flowers that have these part but are missing one or more is an incomplete flower. So it's either going to be a complete flower or incomplete flower. And then flowers that lack either the stamen or the carpels are called imperfect flowers. And then a flower that has both reproductive parts is the perfect flower. So, guys, there are men and women flowers that just have the female parts. And then there are the flowers that have both parts. And so if they have both reproductive parts, they are considered a perfect flower, meaning that they don't have to have, pollination. I mean, they do have to have pollination, but they don't have to have another plant. Think of, the example we use on campus is our winterberry holly. You've got the one that has all the fruit, and then you have the one that doesn't. And they have to be so close within each other that they reproduce. And nurseries have got to be real careful with that. They've got to make sure that they have, that male plant with a lot of the plants that they are growing, and they have to be within so many feet of the other stock. But flowers contain male pollen and a female ovule, plus petals, sepals, and nectar glands. The pistil is the female part of the flower located in the center, including the stigma, style, and ovary. And after an ovule is fertilized, it develops into a seed. Species producing only female flowers are known as the pistillate. And we've got a picture here that we're going to show. Here we have a flower. We've got a flower. There's the stamen. There's the pistil, the pundicle, the receptacle, the sepal. We've got the ovule or the egg right here. We've got the style. We've got the filament. We've got our ovary. We got the anthers, the petal, and the stigma. But the stamen is the male reproductive organ. It includes the anther and the filament, the long supporting stalk that holds anther in position. And so the anther is these little orange fellers right here. We've got the filament, which is these structures right here that actually hold up the anther, like I said. And then the species that produce only male flowers are known as the staminate. Solitary flowering plants only have one flower per stem. Your inflorescent flowering plants produce a cluster of flowers on each stem, and these are multiple arrangements of inflorescent flowers. So we got a good diagram here on the next slide. We got inflorescent types of inflorescence. We have the spadus, we have the capsule, we have the epi, we have the grop, we have the umbel, the corum, the Simon Bapere, and the Simon Scorpid. And if I've butchered those names, please forgive me, because it's been a while it's been a year since I've actually done this lecture. So please forgive me on that. And I apologize for the dog barking in the background. He comes to studio with me every single day. But again, these are your types of inflorescence. Now we're going to jump into day length and flowering. But first, let's do a check on learning. And guys, with the check on learning, I want you to tell me what color shirt that the turf teacher has on. What color of shirt does the turf teacher have on? I'm writing that down so that I can put that in the quiz. All right, so day length and flowering. This really depends a lot with, annuals. And, especially mums. Mums have to have so many hours of darkness or they're just going to go to crap. They're going to look horrible. But your photo period, the amount of time a plant is exposed to sunlight within a 24-hour period. Many plants' ability to flower is dependent on a specific photo period, on how many hours they are exposed to sunlight. And we've all seen that. And we've all had clients that call us and say, hey, my plant isn't looking as good as my neighbor's down the street. And you look at the neighbor's plant and you realize, hey, it's in full sun all day long. And then you go back to your client's house, you're investigating. You're wanting to know why, your plant isn't isn't doing so well. And this doesn't necessarily mean you planted that plant. A lot of customers, we take over their properties and they fire the previous guy because they don't know what's going on. Well, you look like a super smart landscape contractor coming there and saying, well, hey, Miss Smith, down at your neighbor's house, the plant's in full sun. If we transplant this plant, to full sun, you're going to be able to enjoy the same beautiful blooms that your neighbor is. We got to remove it from that microclimate of where it's getting shade most of the day. It needs full sun. And a lot of your homeowners aren't going to know that. So you need to explain to them why they're having difficulty with good bloom time and good blooms. It's a lot of it to do with the sunlight. But plants can be categorized based on their photoperiod needs, whether it's a short day, long day, or even a neutral day. We're going to talk more about that here. Your short day photoperiod. Only flower when the photoperiod reaches a longer amount of darkness than sunlight. These plants usually flower in the spring and fall. Ta-da! The mums. They need a longer amount of time of darkness. And I'm thinking mums, require at least 8 hours of darkness. And they do bloom in the fall. And we will see some pop up periodically in the spring, where they kind of reset themselves. But long day photoperiod. Only flower when the photoperiod meets a longer amount of sunlight than darkness. They need a longer period of sunlight. And these plants usually flower in the summer. Our annuals, and then some of your other summertime bloom plants. Day neutral, these plants flower regardless of day length. Some plants will still flower longer and larger amounts during longer days. Example, the petunia. So it doesn't really matter to the plant. Like you said, you may just see a little difference in the size of the bloom and how much they may last a little bit longer if they're getting longer sunlight days. All right, fruits of a plant. This is the final product from the ovary of a flower. Your carpels are the leaf-like structure that enclose the ovules that will eventually develop into seeds. We have simple fruit, which have one carpel, and then we have a compound fruit that may have 2 or more carpels. And here are your types of fruits. Again, the simple fruits, these fruit types are produced by flowers containing one pistil, the main female reproductive organ of a flower. Your aggregate fruits, these fruit types are developed from flowers which have more than one pistils. They consist of a mass of small drupes that develops from a separate ovary of a single flower. Multiple fruits, these fruit types are developed not from one single flower, but by a cluster of flowers. And then your accessory fruits. These fruit types are developed from plant parts other than the ovary. With photosynthesis, and there you have the equation. But a plant uses sunlight, energy, carbon dioxide from the air and water, and dissolved nutrients from the soil to produce sugars. The highest production rate occurs between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Production decreases when temperatures are above or below this range. So the plants are producing their own food through photosynthesis. Simple glucose sugars are then converted into complex sugars or carbohydrates. In your chloroplast, this is the main location for photosynthesis. It contains chlorophyll, which gives the plants its green color. And plants lacking that chlorophyll are going to lose that vigorous green color. With light, photosynthesis is dependent on the availability of the light. Light's 3 main factors include quality, duration, and intensity. The quality is the type of wavelength that is reaching the plant surface. The type of wavelength. The duration is the amount of time that the light is available, and the intensity is the quantity of light available. So all of this, photosynthesis is dependent on, the availability of the light, and light's main factors include the quality, duration, and intensity. With respiration, this is the chemical process that converts starches and sugars into usable energy. Respiration happens when active gas exchange is happening as carbon dioxide and oxygen pass through the stomata and fill the open spaces. So those stomatas are opening, they're letting that gas exchange happen, and carbon dioxide and oxygen will pass through the stomata. And it is the guard cells that actually control the stomata, allowing them to open and close. With water, turgor pressure within the plant cells is what maintains the plant cell shape and keeps the plants upright. So, they're not wilted. They're standing straight up, and that is the pressure, based on water. The pressure of water maintains this needed pressure, and the loss of turgor pressure can occur when a plant is using more water than it can absorb. Water is essential to all the major functions within a healthy plant. It uses water for absolutely everything. With transpiration, the loss of water through the plant parts, majorly through the stomata, are at about 90%. The other 10% of water loss happens during other processes taking place within a plant. And we actually do a lecture on, I can't remember the actual title of the lecture. It either has to do with IPM or natural controls. But there was the situation of the California oak moth that came and defoliated the oak trees in California. So, hence the California oak moth. And people in California were upset that they were losing their trees. And in California being more of a liberal state, they don't want to irrigate. They don't want to waste water for irrigation. They're paying people to remove their turf grass, and they are against pesticides. But this was a situation where the residents of California that were experiencing the California oak moth defoliating their oak trees, they wanted to use a pesticide, or they wanted to cut down their oak trees. They did not want to see the defoliated trees during the active growing season when leaves are out. Now, of course, everybody knows, oaks are going to lose their leaves in the fall, but they didn't like seeing it during, the spring and summertime when they were affected by these moths. Well, it took a couple ag agents to realize that, hey, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. So, Eric, where are you going with this? Well, we're going to transpiration. The agents discovered that the oak moths were actually a blessing for the tree because it only happened during the dry season. And so these oak moths would come and defoliate the leaves, which prevented the trees from losing 90% of the water, right? They were able to retain that water. They weren't able to transpire and, excrete that water vapor out into the atmosphere. All of it was held within the tree. So the tree were able to survive the dry season. And when these oak moths were defoliating the tree, they also had to use the bathroom. So they were defoliating these trees. I mean, they were eating them up, and they were dropping, natural fertilizer at the base of the tree. And so when the rains returned, these oaks had a, awesome abundance source of fertilizer, and the water was able to soak that into the soil. The trees were actually were more beautiful per se, the second and third years around after the defoliation. So, not all circumstances are bad in Mother Nature. This was actually Mother Nature helping these oak trees, and they prevented the trees from losing that water. But as stomata open and water escapes through the open areas, fresh water is taken up through the roots, and this acts as a cooling effect for plants as the water evaporates from the leaves on hot days. So they're natural air conditioning. Transpiration rates decrease when less water is available to the plant, and this causes photosynthesis to slow. And, transpiration is a big part of, irrigation, especially with turf grass. With temperature changes and extremes can affect all plant activity, including the flowering and fruit production and photosynthesis, as well as reproduction, water use, and dormancy. Temperature drops early in the summer and fall season can cause plants to produce seed or flower too early. We don't want that to happen. If we have, some cool days in August or whatever, we don't want that. Same thing with pruning, right? We don't want to prune in late summer, early fall, because that's going to generate new growth as well. But unstable temperatures early in the growing season can cause plants to break dormancy too early or prevent plants from producing fruits and the desired times during the growing season. Plant naming. All right, so we kind of finished up the anatomy part, so we're going to talk about the plants here itself. But with plant naming, plant taxonomy is the study of plant diversity, naming, identification, and plant evolution. And so these are your PhDs sitting around in the labs coming up with these new things. And the first time I actually seen this other than high school, normal biology in high school, I remember seeing this distinctively at Clemson University when I took oh my goodness, what was the name of the class? It was in the Masters of Biology program. It was vertebrate biology, which was a nonetheless just a strange class, but I absolutely enjoyed it, and our professor was just super cool. But, we talked about the classification of animals. And what we're mainly concerned with in, botanical names of plants is the genus, the genus and species. That's our main thing. We don't really, talk about class or order or anything. We're mainly concerned with genus and species when it comes to botanical names. But plants are grouped into classifications based on their similarities, and they are identified by the characteristics and, more recently, their DNA. And so, with plant naming, taxon is applied to any grouping of plants within the same species, genus, or family. These standards are based on the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature, and the current binomial name system that is currently used worldwide was developed in 1753 by Carl Linnaeus and was published in 1980. And the first time I heard this guy's name was in that same class. But this code recognizes the special category of cultivars of a plant. So with plant naming, the species of a plant contains the genus and specific epithet. The plant genus is always capitalized, and then the specific epithet is lowercase unless based on a person's name. Can come from a person's name, old common name, location, or distinctive of a plant's specific characteristic. And then both names are underlined when handwritten and italicized when typed. And so basically we're looking at the Magnolia grandiflora, common name, bull bay, or southern magnolia. I'm more familiar with it being called southern magnolia, but the family is the Magnoliaceae, which is always italicized. The genus is the Magnolia, must always start with the capital uppercase letter. And then the species, the first name grandiflora, always starts with a lowercase letter. And with the variety, occurs in nature, and the cultivar is a cultivated variety. So, Exmouth is an example. The main words of the cultivar are never italicized, always start with a capital letter, and are placed inside single italics. So that's how we actually name these plants. Trademarks protects the name of a plant produced intentionally by breeders. Breeders must legally register plants in order to obtain an official trademark and must be renewed every 10 years. With the patent, owners have the sole right to grow or authorize other growers to produce their plants. They must be renewed every 20 years and royalty is earned. And if you are a nursery, garden center, or whatever, growing these plants, you're going to have people come out and check this. They're going to make sure that they are getting paid for their royalties. They are the ones that patented the plant, so they are going to get their fees. Here's just, the difference. Herbaceous is a plant with a fleshy green stem that completely dies back to the ground at the end of each growing season. Annual lives for one growing season. Biennial lives up to 2 growing seasons. Perennial lives for several growing seasons. And then a subshrub is a lower portion of a shrub that is woody while the top portion is herbaceous. I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, but, they do exist out there. And then here, just a chart, woody versus herbaceous. Woody plants that produce wood as structural tissue. Herbaceous plants that have no persistent woody stem above the ground. Woody plants have a strong stem. Herbaceous have a flexible stem. With woody plants, the stem is covered with the bark. Herbaceous, the stem stays green. Woody plants, the tallest and largest plants on earth. Herbaceous are comparatively short and small. Woody plants, mainly perennials. And then your herbaceous plants, annuals, biennials, or perennials. With your growth habitat or growth habit, the general shape or form of a plant is what we mean by growth habit. Whether it's a tree, it's a single stem that grows more than 20 feet tall. A shrub, a multi-stem that grows between 2 and 20 feet tall. And I've seen this different in different textbooks, guys. But a vine, stems that grow in a climbing or twisting way. Your ground cover grows low to the ground in a spreading habit. And then woody means that stems that survive year after year. Plants can also be grouped by leaf retention, the plant size or form, their temperature requirements, light requirements, and their water needs. Plants are often identified by distant characteristics. Their phyllotaxy, their leaves, their buds, their stems, their flowers, their fruit, and their bark. The phyllotaxy, the arrangement of the leaves, the buds, and flowering parts on the axis of the stems. Main types, whether they're opposite, alternate, whorled, or alternate. Here we have some different leaves. We study the veins, we study the shapes, the arrangement, the edges, the arrangement on the stem, even the margins. But look at the veins. There is a net-like vein. 2 different ways that they can appear, and then they're parallel, more so like in your turfgrass species. Your shapes, hand-shaped, palmately, heart-shaped, spear-shaped, needle-like, and round. The arrangement, simple, compound, and 2 different compounds. Your edges, they're smooth, toothed, and lobed. Your margins. The arrangement on the stem, whether they're alternate or opposite. And basically with that, the actual leaves here are directly opposite of each other. Here, they're alternating. It's the difference you can tell between, a lot of the hollies and the plant that people always call a holly. And I'm not talking about boxwoods. I'm talking about, I hate it when something leaves my mind. If I can think of it, we'll definitely come back to it. But then here is whorled. Here's your leaf margins, and several of these. Undate, cyanate, serrate, dentate, lobate, scalloped, palmate, digitate, bipenitsect, tripenitsect, penitsect, palmatesect, pedate, palmately lobate, bardate, tripartite, I'm not even going to try. Like, guys, I know I'm messing these up, but you know, your palmatoparite, pinnatoparite, and your pinnatophyid. So I hate that I'm messing these up, but you know, this is what we teach day one of plant science, and you know, we don't come back to it till a year later. So, but you know, being able to identify these and spell them is the way we need to go. We don't need to really worry about how to pronounce these things. Just be able to identify it and know how to spell them. But leaves, you know, that's the easiest way to identify the plant. Focus on the shape, size, texture, and margins. You know, the deciduous plants, they lose all their leaves every year. Evergreen plants only lose a portion of the leaves each year. Here's the venation, leaf venation. They're either parallel, run alongside one another, or they're netted. The veins branch from the midrib. Netted protects the leaf from being susceptible to tearing, and then palmate, the veins expand outward from the base of the leaf. And here are different venations. You know, arcuate, these are secondary veins bending toward the apex. Cross venulate, small veins connecting secondary veins. Dichotomous, veins branching symmetrically in pairs. Longitudinal, veins aligned mostly along the long axis of the leaf. Palmate, several primary veins diverging from a point. Parallel, veins are arranged axially, not intersecting. Pinnate, secondary veins paired oppositely. Rectulate, smaller veins forming a network. And then rotate, in plate, peltate leaves, veins radiating. Your types of leaves. Again, this helps you identify your plant materials. You got oval, lanceolate, obovate, elliptical, spatulate, cordate, obsolanceolate, obcordate, oblong, linear, peltate, cunate, reniform, hastate. And then here you have your margins or your shapes. Sorry, entire, undulate, serrate, doubly serrate, dentate, crenate. Think about that. Ilex cornuta or Ilex crenata. You know, and think about, you know, zooming in on some of those leaves, especially, you know, like your crenata hollies, lobed, parted, and palmate. Your buds. Best to use buds for plant identification before they open. The flower buds are usually larger than the leaf buds. And I remember when my dad passed the certified plant professional, he went with me down to Wilmington when everything was leafed out, and he had to go back and retake. And he went to, when the Green and Grow had like a secondary show in Charlotte, or we went to some type of conference, but everything was defoliated. No leaves were on the deciduous trees, and he passed it with flying colors. He's like, I just knew the buds. He's like, I was able to identify the plant with the buds. But the types of bulbs, you know, valvate, conical, or imbricate. Distinguishing features of stems, color, shape, and appearance of the lenticels. The hair, you know, nodes, internode, in between the nodes. Your terminal bud, lateral bud. We've seen, you know, part of this already at the beginning of this lecture. Leaf scar, flower bud scar, lenticel, and then your terminal bud scar. The easiest way to identify a plant, you know, is the flowers and the fruit. Got acorns and samaras here on the maple. Bark changes throughout a tree's growth cycle. Lenticels can be found on the bark of the tree, and then useful identification tool when leaves or fruits are not available. And then the form and habit. You know, plant growth habits can change within species and cultivars, and then the growth can change depending on environmental growing conditions, and it shouldn't be used as a standalone identification tool. All right, guys, and that concludes. I know we're a little bit over the 50-minute requirement, but thank you for joining us for this class. Class 2161, course number, Plant Anatomy and Names. And for a final check on learning, we need to come up with a question. What is the turf teacher's favorite shrub? That is not being used quite so much, but it is the Indian hawthorn. So I do appreciate you guys joining us here, and we will check you guys in the next lecture. Turf teacher out.